Hello and welcome to a Conquest, the Last Argument of Kings battle report. Today, we're playing Spires versus City-States and the scenario is Maelstrom. This is an experimental format, so please do comment down below to tell me if you enjoy it or what you need to change. This is playing back a 2x speed recording and commentary over the top. I'm playing Spires today, and this is a very brass tacks kind of list. It's not actually how I prefer to play Spires, but the way that I prefer to play Spires was heavily disrupted by the game changes that were released in February, and with those changes, a lot of what made, for example, the list I took to CanCon work have kind of been disrupted. When I say disrupted, I mean all of the pieces can still be taken in the same configurations that they were, but a lot of the underlying strengths don't work the same way. In particular, medium characters and light scoring units now no longer score. So what we're doing here is this is a kind of list that I prefer to play when something has significantly changed, and I want to just go back and see the basics around what works. So we are playing an Under Spire list that has considerably fewer activations. It's only an 11 activation list. And it's running sort of more mediums, fewer lights, larger blocks, trying to just play basic Conquest. I want to test out some ideas, particularly with regards to how character activations have changed, how you can chain characters into the units that they're in, and see if that works in a Spires context. So, we're still an Under Spires list, and we still have a Pheromancer Warlord, Avatar Projection, and in this case, attracting Pheromones for flank in a unit of 4 Brute Drones, an Abomination, and then 2 units of 3 Onslaught Drones. The Onslaught Drones I don't have high hopes for, but they are reasonably solid offensive units that benefit a little bit from Regeneration Under Spire. We then have a second Pheromancer. He's just got Degenerative Aura, that's the Lethal Demise rule, in a unit of 7 Onslaught Drones. He has a unit of 5 Brood Drones, so a significantly outsized unit in his warband. Then we have a high clone Executor with 8 Force-Grown Drones and Cascading Degeneration for Aura of Death 4 in a unit of 5 Marksman Clones. In my opponent Michael's list, we have got an Aristarch with Atalanta Spear, not the Warlord in this particular case, and Inscription of Impact Resistance and Long Lineage in a unit of 6 Phalangites with a Dorilates, 2 Prometheans and a unit of 3 Selinoi, a Warlord Polemarch with the Aristia, that's the extra charge distance draw event banner, and the Blades of Eakides in a unit of 6 Hoplites including a Dorilates and a Minotaur Haspist auxiliary, 3 Thyreans, 3 Haspists, and 3 more Thyreans. Now, we're already progressing on through the game, and as you can see, units are moving on. I've moved my Force-Grown Drones with High Clone Executor on over here. Michael actually delayed his unit of Selinoi Rangers and has brought them on the second turn. Now, I like this as a play. One of the things that it's easy to do with, in fact, I've done it with my Force-Grown Drones, is you assume that units have to turn up quickly because they are light and that is their advantage, but some light units don't actually strictly benefit from being on the field that quickly. Selinoi Rangers are a good example of this. They are a light skirmishing unit with loose formation, but they don't want to just run into the teeth of everything in your opponent's army. They exist to support the main bricks, the main Phalangites and Hoplite blocks. They have arcing fire for that particular reason, and so keeping them back when there is no advantage from pushing them forward, I think is quite sensible by Michael. Things that Michael is experimenting with this list otherwise is the double Prometheans and the Phalangites. Now, Phalangites are generally considered to be a sort of like less popular regiment than Hoplites, and we will see some of their strengths and weaknesses during this game. But it's interesting to experiment with, and I think with just some tweaks, the unit could work quite well. Now, overall, we're already progressing on into turn 3 here, I think, or maybe this is turn 2. Yep. So my Force-Grown Drones have continued to move forward. The Haspists have arrived over here, and then the Promethean has moved up in this direction. I don't know if they are visible on the table yet, but we will be seeing Hoplites over here relatively soon, and I'm moving up with my Onslaught Drones. So this is a unit, I think I've deployed this correctly. So this is 8 total, so it's 5 wide, 5 wide along the front, 3 wide along the back, with a Pheromancer. The hope here is that Regeneration and Pheromancer Healing and Pheromancer Resolve can keep this unit alive, but to be frank, Onslaught Drones are not fragile. They are going to be facing off against Hoplites, where Linebreaker will be relevant, but they're ultimately kind of outclassed, particularly trying to use Lethal Demise. They're outclassed as a unit. I have higher hopes for my Brute Drone regiment, and the Brute Drone, like both of these regiments, the Brute Drones and the Onslaught Drones, are endeavoring to try something out with the new character activations. So in particular, both of these units can have the Pheromancer activate, Pheromancy to some effect, whether it's to heal or grant additional attacks. and perform an action to debuff the enemy, or if I say increase their own speed, but induce lethargy will be the most common choice. And then immediately chain into the activation of the unit and say charge or clash for considerable effect. Now the hope is that this will be good, but it requires considerable setup because by using Pheromancies, what you're going to be doing is you'll be pushing cards to the bottom, so you have to have duplicates. This list wouldn't work, for example, with just one unit of Brute Drones, but I'm fine having 2 units of Brute Drones. So we're pushing basically on all flanks here. We have the Force-Grown Drones are moving up on what is my right, the Onslaught Drones on my left, the Marksman Clones in a relatively central position, and then the Brute Drones going for the center. Michael is going to respond basically on all of the same fronts. So he's got the Phalangites deployed over here. We will see the Dorilates arriving next turn in this position, and he's generally moving to contest and engage. Prometheans will support each of the big blocks. They're going to be using their buffing spells. I like Prometheans the more I play against them. Hephaestians are like a cleaner, dangerous, powerful option, cleave 3, terror 2, etc. But they are heavies, and you only have so many heavies in the list, particularly city-states, who don't have a lot of capacity to really aggressively push the reinforcement role. They have to kind of arrive consistently. And the fact that a Promethean can arrive early and go very far forward, or arrive late and catch up with a hoplite brick, for example, I think gives it a real role. There's a definite utility in having pieces that can arrive, say, on turn 3 and catch up with units like hoplites that arrive on turn 2. Now, the action is beginning over here. We are in turn 3. I tried to go with these Aura of Death Force-Grown Drones. We went for a 4+ rerollable charge into the Selinoi, but we whiffed it. It is what it is. They've pushed forward. I'm not incredibly concerned about the Haspists flank charging them, because if that happens, it's going to leave the center open for me to go and claim points in. And in any case, ultimately, the Force-Grown Drones, they've got Bastion up. It's not going to help them against the Haspists, but they are there kind of to fight and to die. Now, on this right flank, in terms of other developments, the Chrysalid, I'm going to call it a couple of times, the Abomination has arrived. It's arrived. I'm trying out an Abomination in this list. It's been a long time since I used an Abomination. In fact, I think the last time I used an Abomination was in a Directorate list back in 1.5.1 of the game, but we are trying out an Abomination now. With the points nerf to Brute Drones, the 170 points for the minimum unit, the Abomination is a little more viable just by comparison. Now, it's still not a fantastic unit. In fact, it's very fragile, and its damage output is not particularly high, but it is incredibly fast. Speed 10 is tied with Strix for the fastest unit in the game, and unlike Strix, an Abomination can score. So the 20-inch, the yeet forward over here, the 20-inch movement has comfortably got it into a mid-zone in Maelstrom on turn 3, without any need to use the reinforcement line or anything like that. So we have moderate hopes for the Abomination in this game, and in fact it will probably be the most interesting piece that I play with, because I'm otherwise playing big block Spires, and it turns out, spoiler alert, I don't like big block Spires. It was well worth trying, but if you're going to play this kind of game, I feel like Under Spire is not necessarily the way to do it. Now, technically, going up to the larger blocks with things like Brute Drones in particular, and like nominally Onslaught Drones, does allow you to maximize your potential use of regeneration, but a lot of these regiments are so fragile, or like Brute Drones are tough enough to make this work, but Onslaught Drones, like, realistically, are too fragile to comfortably avoid getting broken and shattered unless the units are very, very large. So I've gone with 7 Onslaught Drones in this particular list, but ultimately Onslaught Drones are not necessarily any more durable than than Force-Grown Drones. And Force-Grown Drones, like, minimum you want 8 stands plus a character. So for this to work, I would need more Onslaught Drones, and I don't own any Onslaught Drones. In fact, if you look closely at this unit here, you will see it is a hodgepodge mix of different stands. Those are my Strix and my Force-Grown Drone regiments there, just because I own a lot of Force-Grown Drones, but I don't own really. I've got 3 stands that I use as proxied Onslaught Drones, and which I sort of wanted to experiment with. Now, the Prometheans have both turned up, so the second Promethean turned over here. It will be played by a Hephaestian model, but it's going to be a Promethean, both giants are Prometheans, and we can see that the Hoplites have moved over here to engage the Onslaught Drones. Now, this Promethean is obviously eventually going to zigzag back to where he was. This was a bit of an experiment in, so what Michael was interested in, hopefully, was running around to engage and slow down the Onslaught Drones. but the forest on my flank here is going to protect me from impact attacks. And what he'd hoped to do actually was to line up kind of like this, corner to corner. Monster regiments are very flexible in how they can charge, but the obligation to maximize contact still stands. And that means because I'm 2 ranks deep, he would have been at minimum required to be drawn forward to here, which would have pulled him out of the forest into like clean shot range of these Marksman Clones. And he ultimately decided, look, he didn't need to do that right now. That could wait. The Dorilates, so not Dorilates, the Phalangites are now turning up over on the right flank, and they'll be moving to engage or push forward toward the Force-grown drones. And this is where, so I actually quite liked the concept of the Phalangites here, but Michael was quite badly undone by one very small decision in list making. This is one of the things where you test and these things play out, and then you go back and you change. There is a big problem with this Phalangites unit, and that big problem is that there are 6 of them, which means that if you want to rank them up too wide, they're 4 deep because of the Aristarch. And that means they can't all get onto the table. If there was 1 fewer Phalangites, they could be 2 wide, 3 deep, 5 Phalangites, 1 Aristarch. And that would let them fight too wide. And they really want to be fighting too wide right now because they're facing off against an Aura of Death unit of Force-grown drones. The wider they are, they'll take every extra rank that they play wide. They'll take 4 more hits, and they can endure, like they can't endure Aura of Death as well as this Hoplite block can, for example. This Hoplite block is defense 4 with Tenacious from the Polemarch, whereas these Dorilates are, they're close. They're defense 3 with the ability to reroll 6s from the Aristarch, and Tenacious from the Aristarch, but that's not as good as Defense 4, and the best for dealing with Aura of Death, ideally, is Defense 4 Hoplites with an Aristarch in them, giving them reroll 6s, and Tenacious from the Aristarch. Now, the advantage of the Phalangites is that they are more offensive, they've got full flurry, it's a quite dangerous regiment. They are close to as durable as unbuffed Hoplites, but they're not as durable as unbuffed Hoplites. So the advantage that they would have is being able to fight across a very narrow frontage, but they've been denied that advantage because Michael's taken the unit in too large a size. They've had to fight 3 wide because they just can't get onto the battlefield fully in 2 marches otherwise. There are rules that cover how you do that if blah 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 blah, but in this particular case, the better thing to do would be to add 1 Hoplite stand to this regiment and cut 1 Hoplite stand off of the Phalangites, and accept that they are considerably less of an anvil. Now, because I have far fewer activations than I'm used to with Spires, I'm really just playing this whole setup in a very direct way. I'm pushing my regiments forward, I'm going for early charges. So for example, over here, we wanted to take a charge early in the game with these Force-grown drones. I'm playing much more aggressively than I would, and this is sort of a test of concept. But after playing through this game, I came to the conclusion that this is not really how I wanted to play Spires, but it was worth testing. So one of the things we've done over here, for example, is that we've pushed, I'm just ranking these brutes up ready to come on, by the way. I've pushed these brute drones forward, I've given them Tenacious, they reroll resolve checks. The basic idea is with Tenacious, reasonable saves, plenty of wounds, and basically near invulnerable resolve with high number of stands, etc., they would be able to comfortably take a charge from the Minotaur Haspists without too many casualties. As you can see, that's not happening. I think I lose I take 12 wounds from the charge clash. So this is a Tenacious unit of Tenacious, Pheromancer, Warlord, 5-strong unit of brute drones, or it's 4 with the Pheromancer in them. And I've taken 12 wounds from just 3 Minotaur Haspists charging. Now that can happen. Cleave in any quantity is quite effective against brute drones, but that was particularly grim because I'd been setting these brute drones up so that they could go 4 wide on the objective, and the Haspists wouldn't be able to stop me from scoring the objective unless they killed a full 2 brute drones. Now the odds of them killing a full 2 brute drones were not 0, but particularly with Tenacious from the Pheromancy, they were low. But they went and they did it anyway, and that properly sucked, so I lost, 12 wounds on this regiment. The 12 wounds also particularly sucks. If it had just been 11 wounds, I'd have been in a much better situation, or a better situation in terms of regenerating the next turn, but 12 wounds means that 4 healing from regeneration or Pheromancy can't restore a full stand, so basically, this is all a little bit rough. On the right flank, things are doing a little bit better. where there was one thing that went my way, which is that this Promethean, as we progress into, I think, turn 4, you can see the Minotaur Thyreans have moved up by this point. My second unit of brute drones has appeared. This Promethean did fail a charge, needing a 2, rolled a 1, but because the Haspist, because the Phalangites are fighting 3 wide, the successful charge on the Promethean would have ended up being kind of a pain anyway, so it's much of a muchness. We now have the charge by the Promethean, so we're moving on into turn 4. It goes first, it charges in. It doesn't actually do very much damage, and this is a consequence of having to charge through the forest. It doesn't actually do terribly much damage, but it does some. It kills, I think it only does like 6 wounds to these Onslaught Drones, which ultimately is quite good for the Onslaught Drones, but they're going to be pinned thoroughly back by this unit of Hoplites. It's not going to be great for them. They are very outmatched by this concentration of force. The silver lining here is that the Marksman Clones will be in good position to shoot, but the first thing we're doing is we're trying out that thing that we wanted to do with the Pheromancer. So I mentioned at the beginning of this battle report that one of the things we wanted to attempt in this list is the fact that we can chain activations Pheromancer into Pheromancy into Brute Drone Regiment actually activating. And so we've done that here, where the Pheromancer has activated, he's restored 2 wounds, so he's used a Pheromancy to restore 2 wounds to the Brute Drones. He's given -1 defense to the Haspists. Then the Brute Drones have activated immediately afterwards, so you need 2 Brute Drone cards in a row for that to happen, because the Pheromancy will push the Brute Drone to the bottom. Then the Brute Drones immediately activate, regenerate back a whole Brute Drone that's only got 1 wound marked on it. So then we have a unit of 3 Brute Drones and a Pheromancer attacking a -1 defense Haspist unit in Spire Clash, and we do some damage, but I think we take out 2 of the Haspists. Killing them, or I think we only take out 1 even, but killing them would have been probably ideal, although there is a unit of Thyreans here moving up to threaten. But that was kind of okay. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was all right. Now, yeah, so it was okay. Ultimately, brute drones are just brute drones, and I'm asking them to kind of do a lot in the center. In fact, it feels like a lot of my units are being asked to do a lot. I'm not super comfortable in how I'm playing this. We might be able to pull this game out with some like cheek, particularly in the late game, which we'll see as it occurs. But a lot is being relied upon, like particularly this unit of Onslaught Drones. You know, it's activating now. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the Brute Drones, so I'm going to heal it with the Pheromancer, then I'm going to activate it, then I'm going to regenerate. And we're using the Pheromancer in this case to put -1 defense on the Hoplites. The goal there is that the Hoplites will almost certainly want to charge me. I have Lethal Demise. I want them to take significant numbers of hits on the crackback from the Lethal Demise, and so -1 defense is the way to do that. This does mean that the clash that they make, everything is going into the Promethean, and you know, spoiler alert, they're not going to do that much damage. They'll belt it up a little bit. They'll get 10 attacks from these 2 stands, and then like that's basically it. But it's not too bad. We'll also have the Marksman Clone shooting into the Promethean, and I don't know if they kill it, but I do know they do a lot of damage, so we will have to see. So with that done, Michael is basically playing the stall game. He has more activations than I do when you count for the strategic stack. So he can kind of afford to wait. He's got different units that are very defensive or that deny, like, you know, charge bonuses, etc. And in any case, after this Promethean failed the charge on a 1, these Force-Grown Drones are in sort of a fairly awkward position. They don't have like a clean and comfortable charge. Not to worry, what we're actually going to do with them, now we're skipping straight to it, but what these Force-Grown Drones actually do is that they reform like this so that they can make the charge. They end up going, I think, 4 wide, and then they charge into the Phalangites. Now, this means they don't get any charge attacks, but they're Force-Grown Drones. That isn't the end of the world. And it means that when the Phalangites go to activate, they will cop, you know, full strength of they'll take 16 aura of death hits. Had they been fighting 2 wide, they would, based on the way this formation was put out, like the way that I had to line this charge up, they would have taken only 12, which this is where we sort of see why it would have been good to have 1 fewer Phalangidi in this unit so that they could come onto the table 2 wide. Slight pause for breath. So, you know, a little bit of damage happens here. It's nothing significant. And Michael is now basically thinking about what it is that he wants to do. He has choices with the strategic stack. He's sort of like ordering his decision. I think we're actually progressing on, at this point, we may even be progressing into the next turn and figuring out what it is that we're going to do. Yeah, lots of thought is happening. Michael decided to activate. He's come off I think he's come off the strategic stack with this unit, and he's making the charge. Arista, by the way, is an upgrade on the Polemarch in this particular list that I was surprisingly impressed by. Now, intellectually, I kind of knew this. So how it reads is you replace a unit's charge distance rather with this unit charges its march distance plus 5. This replaces the limit set by the phalanx rule. So the way that reads at first glance is, oh, this upgrades phalanx units to charge +5 rather than +3, which is quite good. But the fact that you can draw event this onto anything in a distance around you actually means that you start getting shockingly reliable, like 100% reliable, definitively reliable, long-range charges on your faster regiments as well. So the fact that like a Promethean it's got a fixed threat of 12 inches if the Aristarch is around and you want that to be a thing, that's pretty cool. Now, what is happening at the moment is that, yes, these Haspists have made the charge, that Polemarch is absolutely juiced, and we're cutting to the chase. The damage that they do is colossal. This unit gets thoroughly wiped. This is the kind of thing that having a Polemarch Warlord... So Michael, for a long time, has been playing the Aristarch Warlord. I also tend to play the Aristarch Warlord when I play city-states. The Aristarch's Warband is one that I particularly like, but you cannot deny that Polemarch Warlord just brings a fixed and static and very good buff. +1 Clash and Tenacious to his regiment are both just kind of outstanding. You give him, he's natively got Flurry, you give him the Blades of Eakides, he has Relentless Blows from the Dorilates, and yeah, this is just like, he will personally cut things to pieces, and his regiment actually becomes dangerous as well. So that whole unit of Onslaught Drones, even after the very anemic attack from the now departed Promethean, even after the very anemic attack from the Promethean, got utterly demolished by this unit of Hoplites. And that's something that Hoplites usually, I play them as like a grinding anvil. By the way, just pausing, Marksman Clones, really good, guys. The fact that the Promethean was forced out of the forest and into basically effective range of these guys, even without -1 defense from a Pheromancer, they'd shot him the previous turn, they shot him again this turn, and some okay dice basically meant that was the end of our big monster guy. So I normally play Hoplite units as kind of like grindy bricks. They don't have to do a ton of damage. I make them, like, I kit them out sufficient to fight middleweight opponents and to endure heavyweight opponents. That's the basic idea. And when you put a Polemarch in them, when you properly juice them up, and particularly a Polemarch with the Blades of Eakides, they keep all of the usual resilience, but they move up to, like, proper fighting strength, properly dangerous, a threat to kind of almost anything that doesn't massively outweigh them. Like, they don't probably want to fight a Tontor, probably, like, a Tontor is less than it used to be, but they probably don't want to fight a Tontor, but they are kind of willing to fight a lot of other things. So we've got the Hoplites now comfortably occupying this zone, but a silver lining is that this Promethean is dead. And the fact that this Promethean is dead means that now there will be some Minotaur Thyreans moving up this flank here. It's the last of Michael's units to arrive, but Michael is beginning to sort of be forced into a position where I might, like, if I can engineer a kill on this unit somehow, I might be able to set up a situation where the fact that I've got like a bunch of scoring stuff left and he's just beginning to be a little thin on this flank. Thin is not necessarily a great way of describing a full unit of Thyreans and a unit of Hoplites that they're strong, but the wounds are mounting up here. And I've got these Marksman Clones in position to make a good shot next turn, because like about half of the unit is actually in the flank, right, of the Hoplites. There are ways and means. This fight over here continues. We had a volley from Selinoi. So this is through obscuring terrain. These cornfields are obscuring. The forests, by the way, are obscuring, obstructing, hindering. And then we just have some big towers, garrisonable, but we're not going to use those. A unit of Hoplite, so a unit of Selinoi firing through obscuring terrain. Just did 6 more wounds to... only 2 stands were in range. So obscured Selinoi firing through... arcing fire to ignore the obscuring, so hitting on 2s. That was 9 shots, just did 6 wounds to a unit of 6 wounds to a unit of brute drones. It is not being a good day to be these brute drones. They have absolutely copped it like every which way. The Haspists have just hammer-blowed them. The Selinoi have just hammer-blowed them, and there are Thyreans waiting in the wings. But that performance, basically the force arrayed against them, is why we have this 5-strong unit of brute drones here, ready to follow up the march. So the Thyreans here have attempted a charge, haven't made it. That's fine. He's not going for. He could go for a march charge to do some impact attacks, but the payoff if he succeeds the charge is high enough, and the value of the impact attacks is low enough that he just attempts the charge clash, doesn't succeed. That's fine. So these brute drones are moving up, and I don't love positioning this way, but they are effectively positioning with the assumption that this unit in front of them is going to die at some point next turn. If they don't, I'm going to be log jammed by my own units a little bit because you can't move through your own units when they're in combat. But based on the force arrayed against them, it is reasonably good odds that my Warlord's going to go down at some point this turn. And by positioning them this aggressively, pushing them this far forward, I'm at least able to get two stands into the objective zone, which I think is going to let me score this turn. So the scoring so far is being very back and forth. It's not. I'm not racing ahead. In fact, I think I have a small lead for one turn. The city-states will recover it, but until we get into the late game, the score is going to be very even. I have a very slight early lead. City-states will have a lead, sort of like through the mid game, and then there'll be attempts made to break that deadlock in the late game by both players. Now, as we're watching this, I think we've killed. Yep. So we've taken out, or we are taking out maybe the last of these Haspists, and a fight is happening. A fight is happening on the northern flank. Yep. So we've got a bunch of a bunch of duels. So one of the interesting things. Yep. So fights are occurring up here. Aura of Death. I'm sure we'll see the Promethean charge in soon. I've gotten relatively lucky in terms of weathering the attacks from the units of Phalangites. So these Force-Grown drones do have Bastion, and of course they regenerate. You can't do both of those at once. You have to pick. They're both a draw event, but they're actually doing reasonably well of taking this fight, and the High Clone Executor is contributing quite a lot. He's been rolling quite well. Another nice thing about this Force-Grown drone unit used in this way is that the Force-Grown drones, they do suffer from declining a duel, but they suffer much less than any unit this side of an Old Dominion unit. So Force-Grown drones always get to use the leadership of the Warlord, of the character that's embedded in them. So declining a duel means you still have to reroll resolve rolls of 1, but it means that these Force-Grown drones much of the time will be rolling on resolve of 5, rerolling resolve rolls of 1. And that's frankly, that's not too bad. Okay, so we're pressing on now into, this will be almost about round 5, and there's a variety of fights. Yep, so the Pheromancer is trying to activate before she dies, and I think, yep, so she's going to succeed finally in, nope, she still will not defeat this unit of Minotaur Haspists, but she will take them down. This fight back and forth has been thoroughly bloody, and I'm pretty sure right now that this unit is quite beat up. One of the nice things about Under Spires is that if you come out of a fight and there are no sort of opponents immediately around you, you do have that ability to like heavily regenerate and sort of pull your troops back. But with like in this situation that we're in now, with this Selinoi and then the Thyreans sort of like pressing in so close, there is not going to be a chance for this poor unit to regenerate. They may be able to fight their way out. In fact, they won't in this case. The Haspists will make the fight through. But had I been able to unengage them, had I had more support in place, I might have been able to leverage that. Now, the Promethean here has come in and it's made the charge, but it has had to reform charge to make this. And the reason why is that enough of my models have died that it lost line of fire. You obey all of the usual removing stands rules, but it had moved forward. It was ahead of the Phalangites. I'd pushed into the Phalangites. I had to reform to do so, and then some casualties put it out of range. That meant that all it could do was reform, charge, make its impacts. And whether or not this was worthwhile, ultimately it probably was, because it wanted to cast a spell, and in order to cast a spell, you need to get some impact attacks, but it would roll kind of averagely. I think it would kill like a couple of wounds, but the giants, they're not there to make impact attacks. So here come the Marksman Clones, and this is one of the things that is going to help bail me out of the game. I'm measuring this out now. We're sort of like figuring things out, but the Marksman Clones, the fact that they, like, if we draw the front line of these Hoplites, I've got 1, 2, 3 stands with at least part of the stand in the front line. So at some point this turn, I'm going to take a volley with these Marksman Clones relatively early on, actually, before the Polemarch gets Fight in the Shade active, forcing me to reroll ones, and that's going to start bailing me out of this flank. Meanwhile, we've got some Force-Grown Drones fighting over here. They're actually going to be doing a quite reasonable work engaging into the I'm so used to saying Hoplites, Phalangites. So the Phalangites are attacking. Yep, we've got some flurry happening there, blah, 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 does some wounds, takes some saves, more Force-Grown Drones attack, etc. Yep, so what we've got happening right now is the Aristarchs going first, and then the Phalangites. They'll do a bunch of wounds to this regiment, but because they've been bodied by Aura of Death, because they're taking more Aura of Death hits than they otherwise would have due to having to be ranked up, the Force-Grown Drones are actually doing kind of an amazing job of fighting their way through. Like, Force-Grown Drones are not actually that cheap. One of the terrible secrets of Spires is that Force-Grown Drones are not despite the way that they're meant to operate, they are not the cheapest regiment in the game by any stretch of the imagination. And so they do actually kind of cost, particularly in numbers, particularly with a character attached. But they're doing a surprisingly good job of fighting their way out through this morass. That they're not going to survive, but all I need them to do is enough damage that my opponent's scoring units are trimmed down to the point where eventually they'll be in a position where they are stuck on zones and they can't leave because they need to score. Now, this is that Marksman Clone volley that I mentioned before. It was critical that this happened before the Polemarch activate, because Fight in the Shade, his battlefield order, does a really good job at shutting down massed ranks of fire. So the fact that they were able to activate relatively early in the turn, they get a very solid volley. Now, this unit was beaten up already from the lethal demise of the Onslaught Drones. So this stand here, for example, was quite badly wounded. But I think I did something like 9 wounds with that volley, and that's really solid. We then have this unit, again, this is a unit of Onslaught Drones. Please ignore the fact that they look kind of like Force-Grown Drones. I'm proxying heavily in this because I really don't have any choice. My collection was built around a series of rules that no longer exist in the game. But we've made the charge there, we've used Burnout, we're just going into this unit. Linebreaker only kind of gives you play against units like the Hoplites. The Hoplites, yes, they have shields and phalanx. Linebreaker only ignores the shields, and even with Burnout, you're going to land like a decent number of hits with a unit of Onslaught Drones, but once you add in Tenacious, which is an exceptional rule, and the natively high resolve of that unit, in this actual case, so in this particular case here, I have actually, because that volley from the Marksman Clones actually did break this regiment, which is excellent, which meant that when the Onslaught Drones charged in, they were attacking into like a resolve 2 enemy. But Tenacious, etc., it makes this regiment tough enough, and with the extra wounds on the cow, that's been very relevant right now. You can only barely see, but this cow has 5 wounds marked on him, which would previously have meant that he was dead. But now the cow is still alive. Now, frankly, just with the Polemarch in this unit with Blades of Eakides, they're not going to have too much of an issue fighting their way out through this Onslaught Drone unit, but with the cow alive, it's a relatively sure thing. So over here, yep, so this fight in the north continues. The Selinoi are actually moving up, specifically trying to bait out the Abomination, because the Abomination is kind of close enough in charge range to go into the flank of the Promethean over here, and Michael wants to stop that. Now he's trying to block me, but it is very, very difficult to block monster on monster charges. It's basically impossible. And so he's just moved the Selinoi up kind of as bait instead. And I'm actually quite willing to take that, I think. I'm sort of testing, I'm looking to see, hey, can I make the charge into the Promethean? Yes. Can I make the charge into Selinoi? But since I'm charging off of the forest, and the Promethean will almost certainly at some point soon kill that unit of Force-Grown Drones. I'm thinking about what my play is going to be here. And I make a decision at this point that is going to bear fruit later. Now, the hope is to wipe these Selinoi out, and it's going to take 2 whole activations to do so, and that's not particularly weird, right? Like, this is a monster, it's charging off of hindering terrain, it's only Clash 2. Like, Abominations look like a monster, but they are like 2 brute drones in a trench coat. Like, they're not hugely dangerous. They do have a little cleave, they do have a little terror, they do have flurry, but they 10 attacks with Clash 2. They are super anemic by the standards of monsters. What they mostly are is fast. Still, in the flank to a wounded Promethean, I might be able to make that. And basically the plan here is this fight in the top of the table on the right side, my right side, is going to resolve itself one way or the other soon. The hope is I can take down the unit of Phalangites, and then I'm left with basically what do I do about the Promethean? Option 1 is maybe the Abomination can kill it, but realistically it can't. But if the Promethean is the only thing left on this flank, it's going to kind of be tethered to this scenario zone. And if it's tethered to this scenario zone, I can potentially move the Abomination around and contribute to other parts of the battlefield. And that is actually what is going to end up happening. It's going to be very, very significant. So we've got the Aristarch and his unit moving forward, the Thyreans are moving up behind them. These Thyreans, I think, are potentially a little bit out of position. Had they been, say, moving up this way here, they'd have been in a much better spot. But I think Michael, when he deployed them, anticipated much more force having to deal with here. And mostly what he wanted to do was to be able to get the Polemarch's unit free. So what we end up having this unit of Thyreans here that are not ever going to, like, they will fight things over the course of the game, but they're not going to massively contribute to the battlefield in the way that they might have had they been given a clean march charge at some point later. And especially if they were like here right now, then they have an 11-inch charge off of Aristarch, off of the Arista, the banner on the Polemarch. That gives them a huge amount of play into things like my brute drones. Speaking of my brute drones, I've won the supremacy roll this turn. That's an unusual experience, to be perfectly honest. As Spires, typically I have so many activations that I almost never win supremacy rolls, but they do actually get to activate, and they've hammered into the Thyreans, and they're going to do plenty of damage here. And this is some play, like this is something coming back to me. This is going to help bring things back to a more stable position, because if we can decisively win the center, particularly it's like turn 6 right now, something like that. If we can decisively win the center, and all I have contesting me other than these Minotaur Thyreans is a Haspist, then we can firstly sit on score it for a little bit, and then secondly, this unit of Onslaught Drones that's been sort of slowly moving up, we can have them sit on the zone, or even, for example, bring the Abomination around, and we can pivot the Brute Drones in this direction. And the Brute Drones here are doing that thing that I mentioned doing before, right? My Warlord by this point is dead. The Brute Drones are doing the thing that I wanted them to do before, which was have a fight against a single enemy unit, win it, and then have a pause for breath to regenerate. That's what they want to be doing. And they will actually have that opportunity in this particular case, which is potentially is significant. Now, meanwhile, the Abomination is this is my proxy Abomination. We will see it toward the end of the game as it makes its way across the table. It has fought its way out through the Selinoi, taking 2 clashes to kill a unit of Selinoi with a Cleave 1, Terror 1 unit that has 10 attacks with Flurry. It's actually about what you expect. And we're going to see, so we have the Promethean's going to have a little bit of action, and then the Abomination is going to act. So the Polemarch in his unit has gone. So this is one of the things you can do now is it's just gone Polemarch, battlefield orders, draw event off of the Aristia, straight into a nice clean charge into this unit of Marksman Clones, and they are actually going to survive, but they're only going to like kind of survive. There's only the Aristarch, so only the Polemarch, and we've got the Haspist, etc. Yeah, they're actually going to roll surprisingly badly. In fact, I think they may have to. Yeah, no, they weren't in range. They had to march charge just to tie me up and stop me from shooting. That's right. Yeah, so they were far enough away that even with Arista, they weren't able to make the charge. So instead, what they do is it's Polemarch fight into the shade, and then he just goes for it. He's like, I'm not in range. Let's go. March charges. The charge actually does 1 wound to the Marksman Clones, and then the Marksman Clones crack back in melee and do, I think, something like 3 wounds to this regiment. But as soon as these guys get a chance to clash, particularly if there's anything else happening nearby, the Marksman Clones are in some danger. So, over here, yep, so we have the last of the Force-Grown Drones, the bold Force-Grown Drones up here dying. They kill, so there's a fight of mutual annihilation as they go down. Before they die, they are able to finish off the unit of, Phalangites, and then they're alive with like just a few wounds. So we have an uninspired clash. What we will have is an uninspired clash into, I think, a reform on the, so we won't see that just yet. We can see they're still engaging, like there's just a couple of dudes engaging the Promethean. The Promethean is going to take an uninspired clash reform, but before that happens, we take an inspire clash with the Abomination, which is going to set up a play in about a turn's time. So meanwhile, there are a small number of Minotaurs fighting against these Brute Drones, and this is a fight that is mostly going to go my way. And recognizing that's going to go my way, what Michael actually goes for instead is a long bomb charge with this Minotaur Haspist past the Brute Drones into melee with the unit of Onslaught Drones. And I think here we are going to see, potentially some of the, I'm not sure, is this going to be a moment where the Onslaught Drones perform or where they get absolutely hammered? Oh, bless them. Okay, I think they perform. They do. They perform. They take 4 wounds from the charge clash of the Minotaur Haspist, and that is a perfect number because regeneration is going to come in and save the day here. And this is, yeah, one Minotaur Haspist. That's like the ideal fight for a unit of Onslaught Drones. Any more than that, and regeneration is not going to cut it. It does not go that far on a defense 2 resolve 2 unit, but they're going to take it here. Yep, boom, big fight, blah blah blah, big attack. I think this is a single wound Haspist, so I don't think I inspire, and we clean it off, and then we do a reform. So the reform is carrying us around. It's going to put us nicely in the flank of this unit of Hoplites here, hoping to finish them off next turn. And that's wrapping up the turn here. So this is the part of the game where sort of the scoring is really seesawing. I have the central zone, and so I am securing it, whereas Michael is only securing, in this case, the left zone, or yeah, my left zone, and it's worth less at this point. But he had like a couple of turns. I've spilt a lot of my own blood securing the middle zone. I've had to abandon the right zone in order to like run away, but basically to clear, take a kill with the Abomination. But we will see that that was ultimately going to have been the correct decision. So we're getting down really to the tail end of the game now. There are very few resources. I think I win the supremacy roll again. Nope, Michael will. Yeah. And so the Polemarch's going to activate. He's going to do the Aristarch draw event, but then he's almost certainly going to chain directly into his Hoplites. Yep, he does. And they will clash into our poor Marksman drones here. So this time around, the Marksman drones are unlikely to be so lucky. If I'm very fortunate, some of them may survive. But against the Polemarch, we're proceeding straight to resolve checks. And yeah, so most of the unit goes down, but then the Onslaught drones come in, make the charge. They actually burn out to make this charge, and they're able to align a little more neatly than they were before because of all those casualties to the Marksman clones. And Linebreaker does nothing when you're charging into the flank, but charging into the flank is natively good, and that will be enough to clean off the Hoplites. So this is where sort of like that plan, like this is not how I prefer to play if the option exists, right? Like the ideal situation is one where you have a comfortable attrition lead and you push and you clean the game out, etc., etc. But when things get scrappy, when things are coming down to the wire, you need to start looking for edges. And the edges in this case are, what do I have that's scoring? What does my opponent have that's scoring? And in this situation, by the way, just as a quick interlude, we can see the Force-Grown drones dying here. Finally killed by the Promethean, who is then able to reform and face to keep his flank clear of a charge from the Abomination. He also gives himself the defensive spell. So the Abomination is not touching him now. Like if he had presented his flank, I might have considered a charge clash with the Abomination, hoping to get very, very lucky. But at this point, he's front towards me. I'm not getting a flank charge, and he's got his defensive spell up. That's not happening. Anyway, when you're in this sort of game situation, what you really look to do is you look to find your edges, and you look to squirrel out your opponent's scoring units and lock his pieces in place, because if he's only got so many scoring units, if you've got one more scoring unit, you can start forcing situations where no one can leave zones because doing so would give up scoring, and you have a status quo that will eventually carry you over the line. If you have even one more unit that can do things while your opponent is tied to zones in the late game, then you can potentially win that way. Now, in this case, we mentioned before, we've got the cows having been given an Arista charge. This was a misplay from me, by the way. The Marksman clones activated before the Thyreans did, and they elected to aim and shoot. This was a mistake. They should absolutely have shot and then moved backwards, because I was sitting at about 10 inches from those Thyreans, which meant I had some shots in effective range. That's kind of nice. But because the Thyreans had a fixed charge, if I had just pulled back to here, the Thyreans would have to have march charged. And because they would have had to have march charged, they might not actually have killed the Marksman clones. And even if they had killed the Marksman clones, they would probably have moved out of line of sight of this Onslaught drone unit, which would give me a much better fight on this flank. As it is, they're in a good situation now. They are going to clean this thing up over the course of the next couple of turns. Would have put me in a better position. We can see now this we sort of sped through this because it happened very quickly, but the Abomination has begun the I'm going for a scuttle maneuver. This was quite fun actually, just in sort of terms of playstyle. The Abomination sort of had been standing here staring at the Promethean. The Promethean was staring at it. The Abomination is not going to win that fight, not in any stretch of the imagination. And so, faced with that prospect, it snapped its claws and announced that it was going for a scuttle and just got the hell out of there. And it turns out, I mean, we mentioned this already, Abominations are really fast. Like, they are really fast. And that speed 10 opens up maneuvers where you can wheel 90 degrees and still have plenty of forward movement left, and then have 10 more movement after that. And so, this Abomination, and I assure you this is an Abomination, not a XCOM chrysalid, is going to eventually circumnavigate the entire table. And this is absolutely the best results I've had from an Abomination, basically in any game. Now, we mentioned before that if I'd drawn the Marksman Clones back, I would potentially have stopped these Minotaur Thyreans having line of sight to these Onslaught Drones. I didn't do that, and now these Onslaught Drones are so dead. They are so very dead, it beggars belief. Yep, wiped out, one charge. Minotaur Thyreans are a little fragile, but on the March charge, they will blow you the hell out. And so yeah, again, we have 20 inches of movement on the Abomination, and so in basically 2 turns, it's moved like more than 40 inches, because part of that was a rear charge. It's moved like 44 inches across the course of 2 turns, that's actually really cool. Like, I'm impressed with this stupid little gremlin. Yes, it's 150 points for like a unit that is less resilient than almost any other 150 point unit in the game. Not exclusively, but like, you know, it is not hugely more resilient than a unit of Marksman clones. Like it is more resilient, it's got higher resolve, etc. But like that's sort of what we're talking here. It is not a resilient unit. It's only got 10 wounds. It is basically just a dude in a meat suit. But it's really fast, and in this game at least, that really mattered. Which means that this is definitely the best performance I've ever had out of an Abomination. But that's not a high bar to clear, because the best performance I've had out of Abominations before this was a meme game where I ran like 4 of them in a directorate list, hoping that would be good. And it was okay, but it was not good. So we are basically in the terminal stages of the game now. We are in a situation where, so that exact thing that I mentioned, where I wanted to engineer a situation where I had more scoring presence than my opponent. Now, I haven't been able to do it in a way where I have more units than my opponent. But these Thyreans were drawn all the way back here, and the mobility of the Abomination has let it come all the way around here. So we have this situation where the Promethean is fixed on this objective, my Brute Drones are fixed on this objective, and the Thyreans are really no longer in a position where they will be able to do much. They're going to go for I think a reform. The first thought is a reform march, just to get away from the Brute Drones. That doesn't really give any benefit. I think we might even consider a reform. Yeah, we do. So we talk this one out, and we actually go for a reform charge. He would need a 6 to make this charge, but if the Thyreans reform and successfully charge the Abomination, and I think yeah, he needs a 5 or a 6 to make that charge. Just with the impact attacks, they could feasibly kill it. And if they kill it, then that actually opens up potentially a win con, because they'd be able to line up like this, and they'd be able to score. But that is not going to happen, and the Abomination is now going to GTFO. It is out of here. It does not want to fight. It is being a zippy boy. It is effectively being a unit of Strix that can score. And that's not the worst thing in the world, if I'm being perfectly honest. So we are in the terminal stages of the game here. Nothing else is going to happen. All that's really left to do is to count up scoring and figure things out. And indeed, we'll play through the last few turns. But what is going to happen here, or the last turn? I think this is in fact the terminal turn. We're in turn 10 now. And Michael is just checking to see if it's even possible to get onto the zone or make a charge, and it's not in any way that will contest the zone. So the score here is going to end. I think he needed a 6+ charge and rolled a 5, which is hilarious. Yep. The score here is going to end something like 13-9 to Spires, which is, yep, there we go. Game is concluded, and there we have MVP of the game. Our good friend, the quote-unquote Abomination. Just pause the video here as we wrap things up. So this thing was the MVP, but ultimately I didn't like this as a Spires proof of concept. I want Spires to play considerably more technically. If I want to play big, heavy, thick regiments that move forward and do things and potentially heal, I'll play Old Dominion and trying to force Spires, who really are like a you can build very durable individual Spires units. You can even do some really cool things with like the Biomancer giving his unit +1 defense in like a unit of Incarnate Sentinel so that they're defense 5. Like that stuff is potentially really, really cool. But it's only on a very limited case-by-case basis. If you want to grind with Spires, you've got to build for it specifically, and ultimately it's something I would rather do with Old Dominion. Instead, I want Spires to play as a technical, like combo-oriented army, and you need things like activations and in particular deployment advantage. It isn't necessarily about having more activations than your opponent, although that can be quite useful, but being able to control deployments and decide how your things deploy relative to your opponent, that is relevant. And that's one of the things that this list was missing. Because so much of it arrived as medium, because there were so few light regiments, as we rolled into like turn 2 and turn 3, the activation counts between armies were very, very similar. And that meant that it was really just down to the supremacy roll who would have to deploy first. And deploying when you have full knowledge of what your opponent has deployed is a powerful tool, particularly when you have pieces that line up well into other things. So for example, Michael was able to deploy, like he has experience at this point dealing with things like lethal demise, things like aura of death. Now he was let down by, this is why we test things, right? The Phalangites weren't able to adopt a formation that let them fight the Aura of Death unit of Force-Grown Drones, but he was able to counter-deploy, like, for example, his unit with the Polemarch, which has Fight in the Shade, is what would eventually face down the Marksman Clones. That City-State's play of lining things up into things that you can counteract. Michael was able to do that, and if I'd had, maybe say, just a couple more disposable activations just in the first couple of turns, I would potentially have, like, the first 2 or 3 turns, I would have been able to make him make those decisions without any foreknowledge, and that would have potentially been really, really good. In terms of Michael's list, he was really just a couple of activations away from taking this game, and by activations I mean a couple of things going his way. And I liked, in fact, most of the list. There isn't really anything that we can do to restructure the list apart from just replace the Phalangites with Hoplites. And frankly, in this circumstance, fighting into those Aura of Death Force-Grown Drones, if the Phalangites have been Hoplites, they would have lived, and if they'd lived, there's a very good chance that Michael would have won the game. So yes, in this particular case, like I love the fantasy of the Phalangites, the perfect 256-man Macedonian phalanx. They have a time and a place, and I think there is something there. Like there is something there, but it is a challenge. And the reliability of Hoplites, the whole extra point of defense, gives you an anvil unit, and that just having an anvil unit is really, really relevant. So in this case, the matchup that the Hoplites were steered into, if they'd have been able to fight too wide, they actually would have probably survived, which is kind of hilarious. Like if they'd had one fewer stand, they'd have lived. It's not something that you usually say, but it would have amounted to, over the course of the game, anywhere between 12 and 16 Aura of Death hits. And 12 to 16 Aura of Death hits does a lot more than 4 wounds to a regiment, particularly when it's pushing past, those are on top of existing hits, so it's pushing past Tenacious. So collectively, look, how would Michael's list be improved? Well, Chariots will be out soon, and they'll be really, really good. Chariots doing things like shooting into the Abomination, dealing with like Chariots into Brute Drones is just fantastic. Like just fire all day, every day, that kind of stuff. But the concept of double Promethean, I really liked. It's hard otherwise to refactor Michael's list in any way that lets it fundamentally change because the restricted and mainstay slots are so tightly contested. The only way to easily move things around is actually to go back to it. You have to go to 2 Aristarchs. The Polemarch's warband, it's fine. It's an excellent warband, but it doesn't give you the flexibility to do things like include Prometheans if you want Prometheans. Those are in the Aristarch's warband, and then of course Chariots when they come out are also in the Aristarch's warband. The Aristarch I think has easily the nicest warband in terms of use case of any of the city-states characters, but the Polemarch just as a character and as a warlord is such a chungus that it's well worthwhile. So overall, this was a good experiment in Spires for me. I did not like how this Spires list played. I will not be duplicating the effect, but it gave me enough of a it gave me thoughts around what to play next, and in particular how to start bridging the gap back to the style of Spires that I liked. And that ultimately was the goal. Was like, okay, firstly, do I enjoy this just more direct, meaty unit style of play? With Old Dominion, yes. With Spires, no. Can we find our way back to the style of Spires that I liked? I think, tentatively, yes. And that will be very interesting to see. As always, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, you can support the channel either via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description or through the becoming a channel member for the YouTube channel. Otherwise, look, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.